say it's me.
you, 'cause
Don't say it's me.
it's usually me, but
Usually Gary call here in this room
I know.
all the time. I remember
Yes.
the classes
So
here.
what's wrong with this picture? Are we up?
Hear us.
Oh, you can hear it?
Now hear us?
Hmm.
Amazing how much this blind make a difference up here.
Oh, the new line?
Uh-huh. Yeah, crazy stuff.
So now can you all hear us?
Yes.
Yay. All right. You know, anybody that's on a call about contracts on Friday, my hats off to you. You're serious, aren't you?
Yes, we have.
Yes.
I had the photo.
And ladies, and I don't see the gentlemen, so ladies, we've got our rooms packed here.
Yes.
Estella
I couldn't
is
find a chair here. Like never difficult.
Estella is lovely. You all should come in and be with her.
Yes.
Okay. All right, are we good? I want some communication from the audience. Can you all hear?
Yes.
Okay,
I can hear you.
perfect. All right, Sheri's cleaning the room.
I'm cleaning.
So,
We'll be right there.
okay, we'll be right there. Today, let me just tell you how that sounds like that Mark's commercial. Today, we're gonna do the right to repair versus due diligence. It's interesting how some things become a hot button and people begin to think right to repair is better than asking for due diligence. Some listing agents prefer it. Some buyers agents think that gives them an edge. It could. I mean, it can, but you've got to understand what's involved in each and why you would do something. So I'm hoping today that it'll be very interactive. You all will ask questions. Sheri and I, Sheri's prepared, and we'll go through that. So let me just ask you before Sheri gets going, how many of you have a preference of due diligence? Either if you're a listing agent or the buyer's agent. Anybody?
I prefer the diligence.
Okay. Estella says she prefers due diligence. Anybody else?
I think it's like a.
I've only used due diligence. I haven't tried the right.
Okay.
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 I think I'll stick with what I know.
Right to repair and think that's the answer to all the troubles and competition out there right now.
That's what I'm using right now, is right to repair. That's what
Okay.
I've been doing it, but not even like that.
Okay, all right. Well, you know what? I'm gonna let Sheri, I've prepared some questions to ask Sheri, but Sheri's very prepared. But I'm gonna let her go through, because if you're using right to repair, Sheri, when you say they really need to know what that means versus due diligence.
So just to give y'all a little bit of a backstory, our contracts probably about 10 years ago, this was part of the contract. Due diligence did not even exist. I mean, what, 10, 15 years ago? That the right to request repairs was actually how everybody used to always do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I guess about 10 years ago, they decided to turn these into option contracts, hence a due diligence period or DD period. If we weren't in the market we're in right now, I would highly recommend that our newer agents don't do the right to request repairs. And the only reason why I say that is because your buyer needs to be prepared to buy this house as is. If you're going in with the right to request repair, your buyers need to be in the mindset that they're willing to buy this house as is. And of course, we're going to ask for things if they come up in the inspection, but if it's not an actual default, then they can't legally ask these sellers to do anything about it. So that means that your buyer has already got to be happy with the school systems, if that's a hot button. They've already got to be happy with the community, happy, the distance to the gym, where they worship. Your buyer has to have already figured all that out before going under contract, if you're going under contract with the right to request repairs. And that's the main reason why I don't recommend our newer agents go that route if we can avoid it. Now, I know today's market's a little different, so this is how agents are winning their offers are winning the bids, because they're opting to do this versus a due diligence period. One other note, and this came up yesterday, and I'm so glad it came up yesterday. If you do a right to request repairs, it means there's zero due diligence, which means this is not an option contract. Therefore, and I had this question yesterday, you can't ask for additional option money if you're not doing a due diligence period, because additional option money only applies if this is an option contract, which in hint is a DD period. So just keep that in mind. We can call it something else if your seller wants some additional money up front, and we can call it something else. So just give Michelle or myself a phone call and we can tell you what to call it, but it can't be called option money with the right to request repairs. Any questions so far? Miriam, don't wreck while you're driving.
Oh, my gosh.
So,
You know,
so if we ask for money for the closing cost, is not possible, what you mean?
No, you can ask for closing
Closing
costs. That has
costs,
nothing,
yes?
yeah, that has nothing to
Okay,
do with it. And I'm
okay.
just referring to just additional option money.
Okay, that's
Right.
good.
Sheri, why don't you go over the right to repair contract? That those are the important parts that they fully understand before they ever consider using it. And then we'll do a comparison between kind of
Like,
a devil's advocate of
Okay.
why you would use one over the other.
so if you've got a buyer and you're going to go in with the right to request repairs, it is imperative that your buyer looks at the seller's property disclosure statement before going under contract. That's the number one thing. Please don't say seller's property disclosure statement to be provided 48 hours after closing, because it's not going to do your buyer any good if there happens to be something on that seller's disclosure that your buyer is not happy with. So it is imperative that your buyer look over the seller's property disclosure and the community association disclosure before you ever go under contract. So that is imperative you do that if you're going in with the right to request repairs. Basically, what the right to request repairs is, your buyer has a right to inspect the property. And then based on what the inspector says, your buyer has the right to ask the sellers to replace or fix anything that is considered a defect. And if you pull up the right to request repairs exhibit, it clearly defines what a defect is. And that is something that is not working per manufacturer's instructions. So, big thing right here, your buyer gets the inspection done and the hot water heater is at the end of its life expectancy. And your inspector makes note of that, you know, the hot water heater is working fine, but it's got maybe another year left on it. You cannot ask for a new hot water heater. During due diligence, you could, but with the right to request repairs, you cannot ask for a new hot water heater because it's doing its job per the manufacturer's guidelines with normal wear and tear. So that's like a huge thing that agents don't always understand. So you can only ask for things that are not working given normal wear and tear.
Sheri, let's just give it a scenario. What if the seller discloses on their seller disclosure that they have polybutylene pipes? But up to this date, they're working. They haven't had any leaks, but they've disclosed it. What happens then? Let's just say they didn't read the seller disclosure. Their inspector says, oh my gosh, it has polybutylene pipes, which we know that there have been class action lawsuits and different things for that. So what happens now?
If the seller's disclosure checked yes
Right.
on it, then we can ask for those to be redone. Because the seller said yes,
Yes, as in,
that we had it.
okay, but they're functioning.
It doesn't matter. The fact that the seller said yes, that the house has poly pipes, we can ask for those to be replaced.
Okay, now I'm gonna check further because as I read it, and here's where we love to talk, it said even if it's noted as a defect, and if it's functioning, you can't ask for it.
If the sellers put no on the seller's disclosure, then we cannot ask. I'm sorry, I have it backwards. You're correct. If the seller said, yes, we have poly pipes and they're functioning, we cannot ask for it. If the sellers put no, we don't have poly pipes and come to find out we have poly pipes, then we can ask for the sellers to replace it. I have it backwards.
No, that's okay, because we love to talk all the time.
Yeah. I have it backwards. You were correct, Michelle.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, it's how many times do I come in and go, my brain isn't functioning, Sheri, let me run this by you.
If it's disclosed and it's working properly, we cannot ask for it to be done.
Right.
If it's not disclosed and it happens to be one of those class action lawsuits and the seller says no to those questions on the seller's disclosure, we can ask for it.
Okay. Great, and so now, the other thing, other than defects, known defects, what about this, the inspector now puts health and safety issues?
Yes, if it's a health and safety issue that has not been grandfathered,
Right.
then we can ask for it. But if it's a health and safety issue that has been grandfathered in the code system, we cannot ask for it.
You know what I was thinking about as I was reading this the other day was how many times do we skip over radon testing?
Right.
And so radon testing, if they did it and it came back obviously health issue, it would be considered something that you could put on there.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, you could do it in due diligence, but that is a safety issue.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, all right. So continue on, I'll just keep poking
Okay.
questions. She does so well.
So if you have the exhibit pulled up in front of you, which you might not, it's broken down into 5 sections. The first section would look a lot like if you had a DD. This is the time where the buyer has a right to get the inspection done and get the amendment, which it is not the same as a due diligence. If you're doing the right to request repairs, you need to use the amendment to remove inspection contingency to ask for your items.
Okay, I'm sorry, I
It's
lost.
called-
I was,
So with the right to request repairs, when you go to ask the sellers for your request for the repairs for them to make, it's called the amendment to remove inspection contingency. It is not the ATAC that we use during due diligence period. So I just briefly my little cheat sheet, let's say that the buyer and seller agree that the buyer has 10 days from the binding agreement date to do their inspections, prepare an amendment to remove inspection contingency, and the inspection reports get sent to the sellers. And this might be, and I know Michelle's probably leading into this might be one of those situations where your sellers do not want the buyers to do the right to request repairs, because with the right to request repairs, they are obligated to look at that inspection report.
So what does that mean if they didn't put those items on a seller disclosure?
Well, they would have to redo their social disclosure, but if this deal doesn't work out, they now are made aware of things that need to be put on the seller's disclosure statement for the next offer that they may get. So with the right to request repairs, your seller is obligated to look at the inspection report. During due diligence, they are not.
I'm gonna jump in. This is a
Okay.
fun thought. This is where we do this kind of thinking. What if you're the let's say you're representing the buyer and you're the backup contract and they contact you and say, Estella, congratulations, your backup contract is now in first place. Would you ever think to ask, did they have a due diligence or right to repair? No.
I wouldn't either.
Well, I know, and these
Yeah.
are the critical thinking that
Uh-huh.
comes after a margarita
Uh-huh.
that happens. No, I'm kidding about that. But now I want you all to think about asking that, because if it was right to repair and they ended it, I would be asking the listing agent, you know, did you receive, obviously you received the inspection, has the
Seller's disclosure.
seller's disclosure been updated?
Of course, though, then
Yeah. Yeah, because if there was something before you have your buyer spending money,
Right.
you know, you want to be aware of that. So just say, when was the seller's disclosure last updated? Because what you've got at this point is
Is the
previous.
original, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, that's a very good valid point. All right, so if you look at section 2 on the right to request repairs, this is where I see almost 95% of you guys mess this up. It clearly reads, if buyer timely submits the amendment and accompanying inspection report, buyer and seller shall have blank days, guys, highlight, circle this, from binding agreement date to get this negotiated. I see, a lot of times I'll see 10 and then I'll see 5. When the intention was supposed to be 10 and 15, meaning we wanted 5 days to get this negotiated. They're putting 5 there, but that time frame is from the binding agreement date. And I had this earlier with an agent in the office. They had 3 and 3. So basically they had to get everything negotiated within the first 3 days, because the second 3 days was NA because it was from the binding agreement date. And the other agent on the other side was smart enough to know that and let it go through. And they argued it. So our agent had to have the inspection done and the amendment to request their repairs done within that 3 days and negotiated within that first 3-day time frame.
well, tell me about that one more time.
Sorry, could you go over that again, please, that scenario?
Yes, so
Make it-
in paragraph 2, where it talks about, so paragraph 1 talks about the time frame that the buyer has to get the inspection done, get the amendment drafted, and get the inspection report to the sellers. The second paragraph talks about the time frame to get things negotiated. And that blank for that time frame is from the binding agreement date. So if your buyer wants 10 days in paragraph 1 to get everything done and given to the sellers, but you want another 5 days for the buyers and sellers to get things negotiated, you need to put 15 in that blank, not 5.
Also, you add to it.
Because it's from the
You
binding
do.
agreement date.
Yeah. Well, and it makes sense, because your due diligence period doesn't break it down. Your due diligence period, if they put 10 days,
Everything's got to go.
everything had to be done in 10 days anyway.
Right. So, and I'm seeing, this is where I see y'all mess up most on this, is that you're not making that second date from the binding agreement date. So make sure there, because like I said, if there's a smart agent on the other side, they're not gonna correct you, because they're gonna shorten that time period, especially if they got a backup. So, also, let's say, so in our example, we've got 10 in the first blank and 15 in the second blank, which means we actually have 5 days to get everything negotiated. So at the end of that 15th day, you really truly have one more day that either party, buyer and seller, can go back and accept the last party's counter offer. So on day 15, we still don't have a meeting of the minds. On day 15, on day 16, if the ball was in the seller's court, the buyer has a right to go back and accept the last counter from the sellers, and vice versa. You got one more day for either party to go back and accept the other person's last counter offer.
I know, I think as you really, if you're gonna use this, you really have got to understand those timeframes, either from the seller's standpoint, really truly from the
Right.
seller's standpoint. But what happens, Sheri? I keep interrupting her because I get all excited. I love talking with Sheri. what happens if during that period of inspection, that inspector says, I would suggest that you have a professional plumbing, a professional plumber, company, check the polybutylene pipe out. Let's just say that. They didn't disclose it,
Right.
they say.
So if the inspector recommends additional inspections to be done, for example, a roof inspector or an HVAC inspector or somebody for a plumber for the poly pipes, the buyer has an additional 7 days to get that done and get something over to the sellers.
So if that happens, you've had 10 days to get that inspection, and now that inspector recommends that further testing or observation be done. You're saying how many days now?
It may be extended one time by the buyer for up to 7 additional days.
Okay, so now, whereas due diligence, you would have been chop, 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 done.
Yeah.
From the seller's standpoint, now it's going 17 days based on our example,
Which-
whatever you
Which,
negotiate.
in my mind, this is just dollar signs that this is gonna be out of pocket for the seller. That's what I am seeing for this. And to me, this is another reason why this might not be the best route for your sellers, because the buyer's getting longer time and more quotes and more recommendations of things that need to be fixed, and the sellers, the dollar signs are going up, 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 up.
And does anybody have the right to terminate at this point unilaterally?
Well, if at the end of the defect resolution period, the contract automatically terminates. If you don't come to an agreement, the contract automatically terminates. It's not like with due diligence, if you don't come to an agreement and that time period comes and it expires, the buyer is still bound to the contract. That is not the case with the defect resolution period. It automatically terminates.
So,
Now
okay,
that's a good reason why some buyer agents are using it, because if they're not sure of that house with that buyer, that's their way to get out.
Only if there's
Because they're turning
defects,
in things that they know the seller is not gonna do.
but only if they're defects
or health and safety.
or health and safety.
Yeah,
You
cause I had
can't-
someone do that.
You can't ask these sellers, and this is just an example that I've always been told in class. Let's say that there was a huge plant sitting in the corner
Mhm.
and you go to move it and the floor is discolored, the wood floor is discolored. Is the wood floor still doing its job?
Yes,
It is. That's cosmetic. You
right,
can't ask for that to be fixed.
right,
Are the windows fogged?
yes,
Yes, but are they still keeping out weather?
yes.
Okay, they're still doing their job. You can't ask for fogged windows. So you've got to be really careful if you're gonna play that game, that the buyer's ready to buy this house as is, because there could be no defects pop up.
Yeah, cause someone called me on it, another agent, that was going through that, and I said, why did you use right to request repairs? And because he said the buyer seems to be unsure, of them really wanting the house, and they started asking for things that they know wasn't an issue. And I said, that's not fair. I said, I think you just should have stuck with the regular due diligence if, and did it that way.
Well, and were
It's
you
too
a
risky.
listing agent?
I wasn't a listing agent on this,
Oh,
this was
oh,
just
well-
someone asking for advice and I didn't touch it.
Oh, gotcha. And if I'm the smart Keller Williams listing agent,
I don't take them.
I would push back and say, that's not a defect, that's not a health and safety issue, you have no right.
You have no right, you're still buying the house.
Yeah.
You can't ask for it, therefore it's a non-issue.
Right. So this one, Sheri, I keep interrupting you, but this one really could really draw out a long period of time for the seller, and he or she can't put it back on the market, because unless you do a mutual termination with all parties, no one person can terminate at this point.
Not until all your timeframes have expired and you don't have a meeting of the minds since the contract actually terminates.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
So with the due diligence period, it's cut and dry. You got your 5 days, you got your 10 days, and after that, we know for sure which direction we're going. With this, it's up in the air it could be a good 15 days that this is up in the air, trying to figure things out.
Let me ask you this. Let's say we're on the listing side and our seller, you have the possibility of getting either due diligence or the right to repair. We don't know when we're getting contracts in until they start coming in. would you have a conversation with the seller about what they could see? And if there are known defects or health and safety issues different, but known defects, that they put them on the seller disclosure, the importance of really completing it
Yes.
thoroughly.
This day and age, it is more important than ever that we make sure our sellers are filling out not only the seller's disclosure statement, but also the community association exhibit. Because they're saying, definitely. And even and I was at the beginning of this crazy market that this is unfamiliar territory for all of us, no matter how long we've been in the business. I was a fan of the right to request repairs, but I sat in a couple of classes, and with the sellers and the backup offers that they're getting, due diligence is a much better option, in my personal opinion, for a seller to accept, because you're gonna know within that 5 days, that 10 days, if the buyer's in or out, and then you can move on to your next backup.
Right.
With the right to request repairs, it could be drug out, and that backup buyer is still out there looking, and that backup could go away.
Well, and you know what is interesting, as everyone knows, I'll do the 10-day letters when that earnest money, when we hold the earnest money, I think we have a pretty good knowledge of the contracts, but not every broker does. So let's just play devil's advocate again. Let's say I'm the listing agent and I think that the right to repair is the better deal, and we take it, or the seller takes it. And now the buyer comes back with lots of superficial, non-defect, non-health and safety issues. They didn't bother to read the disclosure. And I have seen, and the reason I want you all to pay attention is if you're going to accept right to repair, you may want to require that Keller Williams holds the earnest money, or maybe an attorney, because I saw a broker the other day that it was clear that this buyer wanted out of the contract, and they had 51 items. Now, really, it'd have to be something deplorable to have 51 health and safety and defect items. And since the broker was holding the earnest money, the other broker, they said, no, they operated within the time frame and they gave the money back to the buyer.
Yeah.
So why didn't we just have a due diligence at that point? Because they didn't clearly understand or chose not to interpret it correctly. What do you think?
No, I agree 100%. If your sellers are going to go with a right to request repair contract, I highly recommend that you let Keller Williams hold the earnest money. Because there are brokers out there that do not understand this.
Right.
And they're not teaching their agents how to use it either, because for an agent to think they can put 51 items on a right to an amendment to remove inspection contingency, they were just trying to get that buyer out of the contract.
Exactly.
And there were probably, because I looked at, there were maybe 5 things that needed to be
Oh,
addressed,
yeah.
maybe 5 that were legit requests that the seller was willing to do. But it was just very convoluted, and it made it very confusing and frustrating for our client.
So the diligence is better for both sides, I think.
Well,
Seller and buyer.
Anything is good if you understand how to use it. And not everything is appropriate at every given moment.
Right.
So you just better understand what you're using. So what would you say the pros to a right to repair contract are, just up to this point?
Definitely, if we were in a buyer's market, I would think a right to request repairs would be more advantageous for our sellers,
Buyer's market.
because for the very reason that the buyer, you go under contract with the buyer with a 10-day due diligence, but if it's a buyer's market and there's new great houses popping up every day, and they're still kind of shopping during their due diligence period, you can't hold their feet to the fire and keep them in the contract, and a better house might pop up and then you would lose the buyer. If it was a buyer's market, then I would say it might be better for the sellers to do a right to request repairs, and you can get it negotiated. And really, truly, every scenario is completely different. You can't ever treat 2 contracts the same way.
No, that's right. And would a 10-day right to let's just play 10-day right to repair, or a 10-day due diligence, it's a seller's market. Why would I have conversations with the seller? One is better than the other.
one would be better. I mean, we've already shared why the right to request would, they're opposed to that. But then again, with the 10-day, like we said earlier, you're collecting backups. So if you do a due diligence and the buyer comes to you with a laundry list of things, you could just say no because you know you got a backup.
But you could do that, a backup with right to
Right,
repair.
but you'd be done with the due diligence period sooner probably.
Well, that's my point, because what if, okay, we have 10 or 10, it's a seller's market, and the inspector says, I would recommend further investigation of this system. So now, how long have you gone?
We just added another 7 days to the 10 days.
Right, and the seller can't,
Do anything about it.
nothing.
So say that again, so you can do a due diligence after the right request for repairs?
No,
you
no,
still
no,
have-
no.
Okay, because I'm confused on that.
Okay.
Repeat that.
Yeah, I got a little lost. too.
Okay.
Which one is
Yep.
better for this? The
Okay.
seller's market, which
It
one
just
is better?
depends.
Let's just say, here's the example, is the seller gets
One is
two
the seller's
contracts.
market.
One is a 10-day due diligence,
Okay.
and 1 day is as a right to repair. What could be better? Now, what you're gonna think about is is there any added on time that could happen with either one? Due diligence, no. It's either negotiated during that time or they can unilaterally terminate. With the right to repair, that 10 days is not equal. It can be longer because if the inspector says you need further inspection of a unit, you get 7 more days. So now the seller's property can be off a total of 17 days.
Gotcha.
And, okay, maybe I'm gonna throw Sheri off, because
Right.
these are the conversations we have usually before we talk about these things, so that you can think through. But then, that 7 days, let's say it was added on, what did that just do if they said 10 days for right to repair and 15 days for the resolution period from binding?
Right. Well, I think if I read it correctly, your resolution period still stands. So it has expired, if you're talking 17 days to get everything done. And during that 17 days to get everything done, your additional 5 days is already, because that's from binding agreement date too, so that's gonna expire.
Okay. I was thinking, and see, that's what
Let
happens.
me reread it and make sure what it says.
Because I was thinking that then it got that additional time, so if there was 5 days, but,
That's just too long.
well, the fact of the matter is, no matter what, it's too long.
It's the same with the due diligence, the extended period, the extension, 7 more days for the due diligence is gonna be, to me, it's like the same thing. It's
Yeah,
gonna be 17, if you put, depend on the day you put in the due diligence.
you know,
To me, it's like easier with the due diligence.
unless you get,
I don't know, maybe
My-
I'm wrong.
my opinion is unless you have a real serious buyer that just really wants to know if there's something that financially they're getting into that is cost prohibitive for them, for instance. If that's the case, that's fine. That's fine. That could be okay.
Okay, so what the 7 days does, I just read through this, if we added another 7 days to do another inspection, that increases the 15 days from binding agreement date. So it increases your defect resolution period.
Too long.
So yeah,
Yeah.
too long.
Yeah. Yeah, you're wasting a lot of time with that particular buyer. If you got a backup offer,
Yes,
you're losing out on being able to get that backup offer.
yes.
Yeah, so anyway, here's the problem that comes up. The seller has no out. The seller is held hostage during that, wouldn't you say?
Uh-huh.
Now, I'm gonna play another, these are
I
not,
gotta read my
these
forms.
are not practiced.
This is
So-
the reason why you always have to read your forms.
I know.
Here's what we're trying to teach you is critical thinking. Because if I do this, what does it mean? So you've got to be able to play through your mind, because you may unintentionally put your buyer or your seller in harm's way.
Mhm.
Agreed?
Right.
So, okay, Sheri,
Okay.
let's just say, okay, this is fun. we had 10 days, the inspector said, we need further inspection, so now they get 17 days. So now that resolution period backs even farther. What happens if the finance contingency ends during that period? And, well,
Yeah, that's a good question.
okay, but this is, we're gonna cover this another time, because now I'm getting too deep into this. But the finance contingency ends, the seller's still stuck. So you, as a very smart agent, go, okay, the financing contingency ended, and my seller can ask for proof that they can close.
Absolutely.
So I have seen the seller be able to do a unilateral termination to get out of a contract because they couldn't provide
Finance.
that financing. So again, this is where it becomes kind of fun, because you start thinking through, okay, how can I protect my seller? The thing I was taught when I first got in the business was who holds the most risk. So it's your job as an agent to either point the risk out to your buyer or seller, whichever side you're on, and understand the amount of risk they're willing to take. So these are the things you start to think through. Yeah. All right, did I keep interrupting you and you
No,
didn't
but
get
I
all
mean,
the way through?
basically, that is how the form reads. And finally, the, just paragraph, 4 talks about that the, nothing herein shall require seller to replace a product if it can be repaired. So if the item can be repaired by the sellers, they are not required to replace it. So you can't ask for a defect to be replaced if it can be repaired. So know that too for your buyers. And then also, and then section 5 just, it defines the inspectors. Your inspector has to be a person who is certified in that area of expertise. If there's a certification available, they have to have it, i.e. termite, HVAC person, and then it defines defects. Now, this was interesting. This question came up this week with an agent that was using this form. There were moles in the backyard. Moles. At first, when he called, I thought he said mold. I was like, that's a mold in the backyard. There were moles. And little kids played in the backyard all the time. And they had somebody come out and be like, yep, they're moles and we can treat it, but they're always gonna come back because I guess the dirt and whatever was just a paradise for moles. It clearly defines what infestations are and it does not mention rodents. So, and I read this thing like 5 times with him out loud. It defines the infestation by termites, insects, or other wood destroying organisms. It does not mention rodents anywhere in here. So I think
And
you
that could be
need
the
to
house,
ask
it's
the
not
seller.
affecting the house itself.
Well, it's the property as a whole. So yes, I think we could legit ask for the moles to be treated up front, but there's no way that we could ask for it to be permanently treated because they could come back. But that would not be a way for them to get out if the sellers agreed to do an initial treatment of it. Because the inspector guy said, yes, they're gonna keep coming back. And there was nothing that the buyers could, if the sellers agreed to do the initial treatment for them, which is laying down poison or whatever they do to treat it, that was all the sellers would be required to do. And that was a hot button for the buyers.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think I see it all, but Sheri really sees it all. I would have never thought of that.
Yeah.
Ever. All right. I had one thing and it blew out of my brain, because this
I
gets
have
so
a
deep.
question.
Yeah.
And it's just if I was on the buyer's side, what would you recommend is really the best security for that buyer? Due diligence period or right to request repair?
Is it a great house?
Yes,
Is the buyer gonna buy it regardless of what the inspector says?
not sure of that, because they get in there and have the inspection and they started thinking crazy thoughts. You know, you see everything on the surface, it looks good, the seller disclosure shows, a short term on the HVAC looks fairly new. water heaters fairly new, within a livable time frame. So the only thing you're concerned about if there's any structural concerns once you do the inspection. Some things you can't see, as you know.
Right.
So to get the buyer comfortable enough to say, let's do due diligence period, so we know we're in and out, make our decision, move on, or if we do the right request repairs, I feel like there's not enough security for their earnest money because you're not asking for any due diligence. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
And there's not a right answer.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. Each scenario is different, and so there's not a better answer.
So they really need to be
It's
sure they
based-
want the
it's based
property.
on-
if they're
Yeah, it's
using it.
based on your buyer's situation, financially. I mean, when do they have to be moved? Are they moving here for a specific reason? And do they have to be in this house by a specific time? This might not be their dream house, but do they need to have an address so they get their kids registered next week for school? I mean, and the condition of the house. I mean, I think you have to weigh all those
Yeah,
items
'cause I
before
did
making a
mention-
decision.
Yes, I did mention to them, we need to review the seller disclosure to ensure what condition the home is in, that's for sure. I said, but I also in the consultation just told them, you got to be sure you want this house.
Right.
It can't be an iffy situation because we don't really have due diligence period, we just have the right to request. So you're really on the line of losing your earnest money if you go in there and just be picky about things that are not
Right.
a defect.
And I would add to this, let's just say that this home that they're interested in, you think that using right to repair puts them in a better position than asking for due diligence. Maybe not so.
Not always, no.
You need to have a conversation with that listing agent and
Definitely.
go and say, my client is very interested in your home. What would make the seller take an offer over another one? Do they prefer due diligence period or right to repair? I always ask that question
Definitely.
because you may think the right to repair was
It is not.
the end all. And it may not be to that listing agent because they may understand this in depth and they've gotten burned. We don't know. So just ask that
And
question.
I was gonna follow up, always ask the listing agent
Absolutely.
what their sellers are looking for, what they prefer. And if it really doesn't matter to our buyers and they really want this house, then you go by what the seller's looking for. Because we don't want to go in as a due diligence thinking that that's better, because we might understand the situation better, that due diligence may actually be better for their sellers. But if the listing agent's not understanding that concept and might be only looking at right to request repair offers and vice versa, so.
Yeah, so if they said right to repair, then as Sheri said, I'd take it a step further, and clearly you did, where they go, okay, let me define how we're gonna be able to maneuver in this. And from a listing agent standpoint, if you're doing right to repair, would you prefer the time frame, because we just talked about it, to possibly be shorter? Because
Right.
otherwise you can draw out in agony this thing.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I had my list, when I did the listing, I had my seller just go ahead and do a pre-inspection on the
Perfect.
HVAC, the water heater, things that I know was at the near end or, more than 10 years or whatever.
Mhm.
And they did do that, and they had any repairs that was done, they had the receipts ready, so that
Perfect.
there was no issues on those things. So that worked out really well.
Perfect.
good. Anybody out here in TV land, Zoom land that has questions?
Well, I have a question. Hello,
Are you all still there?
I'm here.
Somebody.
I have a question also.
I have one also.
Pause and go get lunch.
Can you hear us?
All-female group.
Yeah.
Can
I
you
don't-
hear it?
I don't think they can.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Do what?
They think they're know-it-alls.
Okay, really, truly, because I think we've covered
Yeah.
what we need to cover unless our Zoom participants have questions. And remember, I can't see, I see in the chat that the sound is quite static.
Yes, please, we have questions.
Let's start our own class.
They're like,
They think they know it all. No, you can't hear us.
They can't hear us, y'all. They can't hear us.
That was toward the men, because there are no men there.
Oh.
I missed it. Do anybody remember what they said for one? What is the days? Is it within 15 days? I missed that part.
Oh, the dates? I can
Yeah.
answer. This is Shelley. So, and unless somebody comes up, the dates
Okay.
are, first date is from the day of all the dates are from binding agreement. That's what you need to remember. So the first date is how many days you have until inspection. You're going to do inspection. And the second date is how many more days you're going to have to negotiate. But you got to remember that the second date, when you're putting it on, it starts from binding agreement. Meaning if you put on the first column, on the first empty space, 5 days, let's say you need 5 days to do inspection.
Okay.
You want additional 3 days to negotiate. It needs to be written 5 and 8, not 5 and 3. Because the number 8 is from binding agreement.
Okay, so instead of for the second one, instead of you put in 3 days, you need to put 8 days.
Correct, because it typically stayed on it from binding agreement date, not from,
Okay.
you know what I mean? So if you want additional 3 days, then you want to need to put 5 and 8. Now, if you are doing, let's say you only want 5 days, right? Total.
Yeah.
You're going to put 5 and 5, and that's it. That means you only have 5 days from binding agreement to do the inspection and negotiate. That makes sense?
So then if you put in 5 days total, so then you will put
5 and 5.
For the first one, you put in let's
5.
say 2, and then for the second one, you're going to
No,
put the total.
just put 5 and 5.
Oh, okay.
Why not?
Okay.
So, Shelley, can I add?
You just explained that.
Uh-huh. I can't hear.
Uh-oh.
You know, what I would say is, let's just say you've got the buyer and you put 5 and 5. So you got to get everything done in 5 days. Well, the seller may like that, but what if you get the inspector there and they're going, oh, wow, you know, there's some things. Then the inspector, if I were the buyer's agent, I would tell them, I would suggest that they put in their inspection that they
Okay, this is
feel like
Scott.
there should be
Shelley, can you hear me?
further investigation.
Guys, can you hear me?
But you just bought 7 more days. So everything then moves that 7 days. Does that make sense, John? Yep. This is where I would be sure and understand your math. And I would write these things down so that you don't miss anything on either side. Any other questions?
Yes, I have a question, please. I have someone who might want to, if he likes the house we see today, not have an appraisal. So, therefore, which I'm guessing he's buying it as is. So do I therefore put 0 due diligence and I don't have to learn how to do that right to inspect, right to request repairs? Is that the case?
I mean, you could, but the appraisal and due diligence do not tie together. They're 2 very different things.
Sorry, inspection, not appraisal,
Oh,
inspection.
inspection. Okay. Okay.
I always use the wrong word.
Just
It's
buy it as is. I mean, you could, but you better make sure that that buyer really wants that and that they're flush with cash to fix anything that could, you know, could be a problem moving in. I mean, what if, you know, the plumbing isn't working properly or something like that? So just, that is not a real good option, I personally believe, for a first-time home buyer. It's okay with someone that's got cash. Yeah, I mean, you just have to explain them the risk. What do you think?
it's a second home, but I think because he's lost out on a few and it's not that old, he thinks that he wouldn't really need to.
Okay, Well, I mean, you know,
Well,
it could be okay.
the market is already starting to shift. And I can tell a couple of ways. One is the amount of contracts that are turned in on a daily basis to the office has slowed down. And that is typical for this time of the year. From May, June, and July tend to be some of our slowest months. And then also at the height of all this craziness, I was seeing 0 special steps. I was seeing 0 termite bond, 0 home warranty. Every contract I have looked at today has sellers to provide a termite and a home warranty. So I'm starting to see those special steps creep back into y'all's contracts when I review them, which is another indication that the sellers aren't getting those multiple offers that they were getting a month ago.
Right.
So my first question to your client would be, how long do you plan on holding on to this house? Because if it's just a couple of 5 years, I mean, if it's not at least 10 years, and they're willing to go in and buy something that hasn't been appraised and that could have underlying conditions, they could be upside down in the house and their goal is not to keep it forever. And then they're gonna be upside down in it.
Yeah, so I meant to say inspection, not appraisal. Inspection.
Okay. But Sheri made a very good point, and what you do is in your buyer consultation or your seller consultation, you need to have deeper conversations today, because I get to get the phone calls of the unhappy clients, and I can't tell you, I've never gotten so many phone calls. Not that we get a lot, so let me just state that. But the majority of clients that are complaining is they felt that the agent didn't share with them the risks involved and put them into a situation now they're not happy with, and now they're losing their earnest money, and they're really, really upset.
Or they've overpaid for the house. They got buyer, they get under contract and all of a sudden they've slept on it, talked to family members, and they're overpaying for a house. And they want out, and there was no out because we did either as is or we did 0 due diligence.
Yeah.
And they want out after they slept on it, and there's no out, and they're overpaying 20 to 50 grand for a house that they might only be in for 5 years.
I'm gonna play one last devil's advocate, and then
I'm brain tired. Okay.
I know. Okay, let's just say you're the listing agent, Sheri, and you didn't tell your seller that you wouldn't do dual agency. I always said that I didn't do dual agency as a listing agent because I didn't want to it's like playing checkers against yourself. At some point you throw yourself in to win, to end this game. But let's just say you didn't put that and you get into dual agency. Now you're a scribe for the other party because they're a customer, not a client. And you put 0, 0, 0, and you can't give them advice. That's what they tell you. Is that kind of a recipe for success or a recipe for disaster?
Well, anytime you're in due diligence, I don't recommend anybody being in a dual agent situation, especially our newer agents. But your client, how would you know to put 0, 0, 0? Because if your clients know to put 0, 0, 0 to win an offer, guess what? You just gave them advice against the other party that you're also representing. So you just violated whatever it is, RESPA, Bretta.
Oh,
Greg, you just violated a bunch of different things by letting your clients, instructing your clients to put 0, 0, 0 in to win the deal.
Well, the reason I asked this, and that was unfair because I threw out a kind of what if, but I had a situation where our agent thought it was a keen idea because they were going to get more commission to do just that. They did dual agency. The seller said, okay. The buyer said, okay. The buyer told the agent to put 0, 0, 0. He was a scribe, did just that. And then all of a sudden, buyer's remorse set in. Well, this buyer had also given Keller Williams and Atlanta North $10,000 in earnest money that now is gone. So I get death threats, and that if I award it to the seller, which that's where it should go, they're coming after me. And I'm not joking you. So the seller ended up doing like a 50-50 split. But I mean, this man would come in, he would stop. You don't know. Again, you've got to do critical thinking. If I do something, what could happen? There's a good side and there's always a not so good side. So think it through. And if you can't think it through, or you just don't know what you don't know, come and run it by us before you do it, because it's much easier to stop, or to give fair warning than to undo something you can't undo. Fair enough?
Fair enough.
All right. Any other questions? You all have been an amazing group. There's 15 people that are going to do fantastic contracts.
And we want to see your faces in person next time, 15 years better.
Yeah, we have prizes for the people that came in today. I'm not going to tell you what they were so that you I got a free sharpened pencil from both of them. But we do like seeing it, and the nice thing is it gives you the ability to network with each other and learn more. But you all joined us via Zoom, and we thank you for that. Sheri, anything?
I'm good. Good weekend.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Right,
Bye-bye.
Well, thank you very much. You're welcome. Are you okay?